It's a pleasure this morning to be joined by Stephen Marks, who has the dubious honour of being expelled by the Labour Party just before Christmas, just before Hanukkah recently. And it's really great to have you on, Stephen, to talk about what happened and solidarity, obviously. It's rough, isn't it?
Yep.
So tell me tell me what happened in your case.
Well, after I think some personal clashes with a prominent member of the JLM and various other encounters, I was told by email in the middle of a branch meeting that I'd been suspended. And I should say our branch is our local branch is, I think, Anne and I are the only two people who could be described as Corbynistas in it, but they were genuinely shocked. And I had a good reputation, as it were, of being a loyal, hardworking local member, and had been a county councillor some years ago. And a lot of the people in that branch, and it's what I think is actually quite typical of the rest of the party, is that most Labour members, active Labour members, are not like us and terribly switched on to all the shenanigans that are going on. And this particular branch is very active locally, in the sense of having canvassed the place practically into the ground, and it's a safe Labour seat, although they act as if it isn't. And it's very good on local issues, very nice people, with sort of basic left-wing instincts in many cases, but totally bemused by Starmer, in my view. And so I was surprised that they were surprised that I'd been suspended. And a number of people, as the saga has unfolded, and then following on my actual expulsion, seem to be reconsidering their attitudes. A bit bloody late, but there you are. And I think that as far as the majority that Starmer obtained is concerned, some of it was genuine members of the hard right, like Luke Akehurst, who we're blessed with in Oxford as a local member. And also, I think some of the people they've recruited since Starmer purged the left, who are being fed a line that all these Corbynistas were actually entrists. They're actually people like the SWP, and therefore they're rape apologists. This is quite incredible. Yeah. And the idea that the left is somehow like militant. It's just, I mean, nobody who was around at the time of militant could possibly confuse the Corbynist left, or indeed, what's it called? That organisation that's supposed to be organising the left.
Momentum.
Momentum. Nobody could confuse momentum with the militant.
No, I think it's quite funny that you forgot the name Momentum, because they have become largely irrelevant, in my view, in terms of the left. But can I go back to some of the stuff that you said, because there's a lot in your answer. So you said that the timing was following an interaction with someone in the Jewish Labour movement, the JLM. Yes. Can you talk about that?
Well, it's just that it was a training session on anti-Semitism for members of elected committees, that is the NCC and some NEC members.
So people who don't know, who don't follow on YouTube, the NCC is the National Constitutional Committee, which until partway through the Corbyn period was the only committee that could actually chuck people out of the Labour Party.
Yeah.
So it's kind of got a really pivotal role. Yeah, cool. So you were in some training.
Well, basically, I think it was Peter Mason who came in on this and was outraged when I just pointed out that JLM is the British branch of the Israeli Labour Party, which was then a part of the Israeli government. And therefore, presumably, if Israel is a Western-style democracy, the principle of cabinet responsibility applies. They share responsibility for what the IDF was doing on the West Bank, and he found this was absolutely outrageous, and made some remark about people like me were encouraging anti-Semitism in the party or something like that, which I then expostulated and said that's outrageous. I demand you provide chapter and verse, which he completely ignored. And it was shortly after that that I was notified in a branch meeting that I'd been suspended. And there was a massive response of solidarity from the local party, and protests at how long it was taking. It took more than a year that I was remaining in suspension. And in the end, I was told that 2 NEC members, Anne Black and Luke Akehurst, would be looking into the matter. And I thought, well, Luke will just make sure that I'm expelled rather than suspended. That will be, and that indeed was the result. And the point about, I mean, I did write a detailed response and put in an appeal, but all that is necessary under the rules for an expulsion to take place is that a 3-person panel of NEC members are satisfied that an offence has been committed. They don't have, there's no overview of that decision-making process. And their conclusion was that 3 statements that I put my name to on Facebook, some of them as long as 3 years before, had undermined the party's ability to campaign against racism. Now, there's no evidence needed to back up that statement. Their unsubstantiated assertion is evidence, is proof. So, you know, this is a complete farce, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's a complete farce. I mean, that undermining the party's ability to campaign against racism is a way of smearing people as anti-Semitic without having to officially call them anti-Semitic. Because if you call someone anti-Semitic, you might have to be made accountable for that accusation. Whereas if you just say undermining the party's ability to campaign against racism, it's so vague that it can't be held accountable. Yeah, and just to give people an idea, there were only 3 bits of evidence against you. And one of them was you just joining in a petition of Labour Jews to Chaka Ramana.
That's right.
Stop using anti-Semitism smears against Corbyn. It seemed, and that was in July 2016. Yeah. It's bizarre that this becomes something that the party feels is damaging to it now.
And they say, it then begins by saying complaints have been received. I don't believe it. I think they trawl through people's social media postings and record and trawl through to find stuff that they can use against somebody when they want to get rid of them. All they need to do is find 3 members of the NEC chosen by, this is not an NEC decision, it's a decision of a panel specially impaneled by the General Secretary of 3 team members that he knows will produce the right result. And this is just not worth taking seriously as a process.
So what stage is things at now? I know you've decided to appeal.
Yes, but the appeal, I don't think any of these appeals have ever been upheld. As things stand, I am expelled. And the process is that you may make an appeal, but only on a matter of fact. Now, the only matter of fact is whether or not I did indeed put my name to these 3 statements, which I've never denied. As to the substance of my undermining the party's ability to campaign against racism, it's not necessary for them to prove that. It's just necessary for a panel appointed by the General Secretary to hold that opinion, and that opinion then becomes, as it were, a judicial fact.
Yes.
Well, this is a farce.
So why have you decided to appeal then, given that you know that appeal won't be successful? Why did you go through that process?
Well, that's a good question. Well, Bindmans have advised the JVL.
So Bindmans is a lawyers, right, basically, who've been taking up a lot of these cases. Yeah.
Take a lot of these cases. That the party's disciplinary procedures, especially in the respect that I've been talking about, don't comply with the requirements of the EHRC imposed on the Labour Party, that it should have an independent disciplinary procedure. And this disciplinary procedure is not independent. Now, this won't make any difference to my particular case, but it was an interesting shot across the bows. And also, for good measure, I chucked in a quote from Jurinder Singh, who is the chair of the disputes procedure, in which he actually took it down because it was so outrageous, but basically saying words to the effect, we're getting rid of the left and we've got to make sure they never come back again. And the idea that somebody with that record is in charge of disputes, it does put some question mark over whether the disciplinary procedure is indeed independent as relied on as required by the EHRC. That's not going to convince anybody. It's just to annoy them, basically.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I mean, there's some value in annoying people, right?
Yeah.
But so clearly there can't be an independent disciplinary process in the Labour Party, because it's always going to be political, right? That's it. Yeah. Who is a member of the political party, how that's decided, is always going to be a political process. So in some sense, the EHRC demand was always impossible, but you're just using it as a kind of Jewish Voice for Labour, JVL, are using it as a kind of way into opening up a discussion. Is that the idea, or challenging it?
Yes, and also to educate people who genuinely don't know that this is the situation. And people I know personally have been quite shocked to discover this. And I feel like saying, well, where have you been all this time? But nonetheless, they are sometimes dismayed. And more generally, I think the rapid stampede to the right on the part of Starmer and his cohorts must have dismayed a lot of people who were genuinely taken in. And I think that the fact that they're now, I mean, the Shadow Chancellor is saying that there will be no wealth tax, and in effect they're sticking to Tory austerity. Now, we've been here before. It was Ed Miliband who went into an election when the Labour Party was in effect committed to Tory austerity, and was completely steamrolled as a result. And that is why Jeremy was elected. And, you know, how many times do we have to go around and round in circles like this, except that this time the left has been eviscerated. And however, the struggle and revolt don't come to an end. They continue. It's just they take place outside the Labour Party now, and with less and less involvement in the Labour Party. And that then leads to splits and bad relations between those comrades who are still in the Labour Party and sometimes are able to do really good work there. They're not for very much longer. And on the other hand, other comrades who actually hate the Labour Party with good reason. And this can get in the way of united action, which is a pity. But I can't really see that the Starmer leadership, I mean, bring on the general election so we can get this question out of the way. And people won't be saying, oh, well, we've got to keep quiet or else we'll have the Tories back.
Yeah, but it looks to me like Labour is quite like plausible that could win the general election. Yeah. It looks to me like it
would be spectacularly incompetent for them not to.
It would, but if in that case, I mean, it becomes quite difficult, because then it becomes don't undermine a Labour government.
Well, yes, but then what's the Labour government going to do?
Well, they'll be better than the Tories. That's what we'll be told, won't we, all the time? It's going to be I think it's going to be very difficult, whatever happens, for the left in this country. Yeah. But I think, so what you were saying is interesting, because for a lot of people who got engaged by the Corbyn project, they weren't members of the Labour Party in 2015 when Jeremy went on the ballot. Yep. I wasn't. I've been a member before, but you've been a member for a really, really long time, right?
Yeah, I mean, I said at the time of the initial purge of applicants for membership that nobody should be allowed to join the Labour Party unless they've already been a member for 20 years. And that was in effect the position that they were taking, which is bizarre, really. And again, the idea that everybody who joined in that period was some sort of trot, or that it was the militant or the SWP and so on and so forth. It's just, I mean, just ignorant apart from anything else. But it means they don't have to ask why it is that Jeremy did actually inspire so many people. Why was it that, how can they explain the 2017 election result, which they just blot out? And what they don't understand with this psephological obsession, this, I called it once an anal retentive obsession with psephological trivia, but they simply don't understand that consciousness is contradictory, and people have contradictory ideas, and their immediate reaction of the sort of people who make Labour strategy is not the word, policy, is to take the most reactionary aspects of people's political consciousness and assume that that's fixed forever, rather than picking on the most progressive bit and try to generalize from that. And it just doesn't occur to them that people can change their political ideas or change their attitudes quite swiftly, especially in a period of crisis. That just is not in their ability to comprehend.
Yeah, I think about that quite a lot in terms of the fact that when people talk about polls and elections, they say, well, you never get swings like that. It's just impossible. But you're right, people's views change radically in positions of crisis when something is offered to them. And we did see that in 2017 beginning to happen. But I don't think the reason why Keir Starmer doesn't believe that is because he can't see it. I think it's a choice of not to see it. I think it's a decision that it's not in the interest of the kind of particular political project that he wants, which is an establishment political project. Absolutely. He's at Davos now, right? He's on the record for saying he prefers being in Davos to being in Westminster, because these are the people he's going to work with in the future.
Yeah.
So it's not in his interest to start to look at the way in which we can work on people's progressive instincts.
No, on the contrary, he wants to use their most reactionary instincts as an excuse. Yeah. And sometimes, for example, the attitude to taking utilities back into public ownership, the opinion of former Labour voters in the so-called Red Wall, and indeed the opinion of most Tory voters, are completely at odds with the views of the Labour front bench. So the idea that, oh, well, you've got to veer to the right because that's where the voters are, depends which voters and on which issues. And they just won't see that because it's not in their, even when their celebrated opinion polls prove the opposite.
Indeed. Yeah, and I want to get back to the kind of the purge on the left, because there's different aspects to this, right? And your expulsion was at a very similar time to mine and to Naomi Wimborne Idris's. And it did really, the three of them coming at the same time and being publicised, I think did really sort of draw to people's attention the fact that Jewish people are being disproportionately affected by this. Yeah. Which I think you saying a lot of people who turned a blind eye to this, either deliberately or just because they're focused elsewhere, because they're not into that stuff. It did force some people to look at that. I mean, in your view, why are Jewish people being disproportionately disciplined?
Well, it's a sort of colonial attitude to minorities, that you deal with them through their official leaders, their chiefs and native traditional rulers, and they then deliver the votes of their loyal flock. And you find this attitude to all sorts of local communities. I remember recently they had a fundraising dinner for South Asian South Asian members. And BAME Labour has, of course, been put into cold storage, but they did hold a fundraising dinner, I think it was, for South Asian members. And it was clearly aimed at South Asian businessmen. And that, again, is a stereotype. If somebody said, we're going to have a special fundraising dinner for Jewish businessmen, which they have done. I mean, that is actually how they operate. And, you know, now that I've been expelled anyway, I might as well say that it's well known that Blair met through this man Levy a whole lot of yes, I'll say it, wealthy Jewish businessmen in northwest London who played tennis with him and so on and so forth, and who all tended to have a certain rather committed view on the question of Palestine, which Blair would have done anyway. But, you know, the tail doesn't wag the dog. And I think it was Uri Avneri, the Israeli peace activist and rather odd politics, but with a brilliant journalist. And he actually said, and I find that Israeli anti-Zionists can get away with saying things that you or I would hesitate about saying. He said, the trouble with modern Zionists is that they sometimes seem to be reading from a script from the protocols of the elders of Zion. Which, of course, is not true, but they do sometimes behave in a way that does that foolish and ignorant people would assume meant there was a Jewish conspiracy, but actually the tail doesn't wag the dog. And it's because Israel is useful to the United States. And of course, what's happened now, when a number of, because American Jews, to their credit, have voted against Donald Trump in greater numbers than any other mainly white demographic. They're not all American Jews are white, but the great majority are. And they are sometimes rather shocked by what's going on in Israel, although why they should be, I don't know, because all that's happened is that some Israelis on this side of the green line, as it were, are now being threatened with some of what Palestinians have been getting in the net all the time. But nonetheless, this causes some people, rather like the people in the Labour Party I was mentioning, who feel horrified about what they should have known all along. But the other important thing is that because of the fact that the mainstream of the American Jewish population are liberal in the American sense, they are shocked or disillusioned, some of them, by what's going on in Israel. But the most loyal defenders of Israel are, of course, the evangelicals, who are bonkers. But they will support Israel come what may. And certainly not because they like Jews, but because if the Jews all go to Israel, then Jews will come again. And anyone
it's a different dynamic in the US, right? So Zionism and the support for Zionism is very different in the US, I feel, than the UK. In the UK, like you say, so we're told, aren't we, that you can't hold individual Jews accountable for the actions of the State of Israel, which is perfectly reasonable. I'm down with that. But you should be able to hold an organization like the Jewish Labour Movement accountable for directly supporting the actions of the Israeli government, as you said, as you tried to do in a very small way in the training they offered, right? And I think these two things get conflated. Like accusing an individual Jew or demanding an individual Jew speak about Israel is very different than demanding that the Jewish Labour Movement account for its positions. And we can't bring those two together. But I think that what's happening in the Labour Party is very much trying to conflate those two.
Yeah. And the other thing is this idea that if you say that not all accusations, some accusations of anti-Semitism are bogus, then you're saying that all accusations of anti-Semitism are bogus. I mean, it's such an obvious fallacy that it hardly should be necessary to point it out. But for example, Adam Wagner misquoted me as saying that there were allegations of anti-Semitism were bogus. I actually wrote a piece which you can find on the JVL website about anti-Semitism in Britain today, its different sources and so on. But what I actually said, which he misquoted, was that the cases of anti-Semitism, both actual and imagined. Unless he's saying that there are no false cases of anti-Semitism, which is obviously not true, then we're arguing about the proportion, and there is no benchmark proportion any more than there is a benchmark proportion of the extent of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. If Jeremy Corbyn is suspended and won't be allowed back the whip because he said that the extent of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party had been exaggerated. But if it's an offence to exaggerate it, then we need an official benchmark figure of what the extent of it actually is, so that you know if you say that it's more than that benchmark figure, you're exaggerating it. But there is no benchmark figure, and the nearest, of course, is the figures that were released under the previous General Secretary, which showed some trivial fraction of 1% of the members had been accused of anti-Semitism. Yeah. Now, maybe that's an underestimate, but it can be a pretty big underestimate, and still the things that you hear, you know, that the Labour Party is an unsafe place for Jews. And how can it be institutionally anti-Semitic when Jews are not? I hate to use a word like overrepresented, but Jews are certainly not underrepresented at any level of the Labour Party's structures, whether it's on constituencies, branch committees, in the PLP or anywhere else. And their views are diverse. And this is something they do all the time, accuse somebody of denying anti-Semitism in the Labour Party just because they deny some quite ridiculous, exaggerated accounts of its extent. And this has been pointed out so many times that you realise that people either aren't listening or are not engaging in good faith.
Yes, I think that's it, isn't it? They're not engaging in good faith. So what's happened is, in my view, is that it's not really about the truth. I mean, I don't think anyone would deny if they were, push come to shove and they were forced to say yes or no. Do you think there's been any exaggeration of cases of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party? Pretty much everyone who knows anything about it would say yes. But it's really the whole thing for me about this accusation of undermining the party's ability to campaign against racism is that you can say things that are true, but they can be judged as problematic, because to say that cases of exaggerating the context we're in can be seen as a problem with huge chunks of the Jewish community and certainly with Jewish communal institutions. So it feels to me like it's not really about the truth anymore. It's simply about the concoction of a whole edifice of apparatuses which can be used to expel the left, to denigrate the left, to...
It's perfectly clear that they've a list of people they would like to get rid of, and then they go through their social media accounts to try and find something that can... it's like a story I read about somebody who was arrested during the Great Purges under Stalin, and he kept saying to his interrogator, "But I'm not guilty." And the interrogator said, "Your guilt is already established by the fact of your arrest. The purpose of the interrogation is just to accumulate evidence for the trial." Now, of course, the big difference between Stalin's purges and Stalin's purges is that we're not going to end up in front of a firing squad, but or indeed even in a gulag. But nonetheless, the travesty of justice is comparable, quite honestly.
Yes, actually, I think that's a good place to end. I think that's perfect. It's exactly what's happening. It is a Stalinist purge. But thankfully, you're right. We're not going to get killed. We're not going to get tortured. We're not going to put in prison. We're only going to get accused of anti-Semitism and have a lot of trolls on Twitter or whatever. So it's not so bad. So if it happens to you, you're in good company, right? You're in company of me and Stephen and Naomi and many other people. And I think people have to be proud of being shut down the Labour Party right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah.